Why are people moving out of New York City? Well, New York City is an exciting place, but it is not always the easiest place to live. And there are some very strong reasons why people choose to move out of New York City. So let's look at some of the top cons of living in New York City. I'm Dewey Moss. I'm your New York City real estate resource. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so that you can stay up to date on all things New York City real estate. So I've lived in Manhattan for over 30 years, and it's very much my home, and I love New York City and all the opportunities it has to offer. But those who know me well know that I am the first to say that New York City is not for everyone. It can be a challenging place to live for many different reasons, but let's look at the top cons of living in New York City and why some people may choose to move out of the city. This will also help you prepare if you're thinking about moving to the city, so that you know what to expect. By far, the number one con about living in New York City is the cost of living. It's very high. And in fact, the most recent data states that it's about 26% higher than the national average. If you start breaking that down by the individual cost of living items, by far, the highest expense there is housing. And that is about 75% higher than the national average. So it's very expensive just to live in New York City and get your housing. If we break that down further, we're talking about the utilities being 3% higher than the national average. We're talking about food being 3% higher. Transportation comes in at about 7% higher. Healthcare comes in at about 7% higher. And goods and services is about 9% higher. Recent stats also suggest that the average person spends about $58,500 plus change on their living expenses yearly in New York City. With that said, millions and millions of people do live here and they do find ways to exist. But if you are thinking about moving to New York City, you definitely need to take this cost of living into consideration. Make sure that you're going to have your costs covered on a yearly basis. Now, the number two con that I would say about living in New York City is definitely the cost of housing. As I mentioned earlier, that's about 75% higher than the national average. However, the qualifications are always the barrier in New York City, and that is the case whether you're renting or whether you're buying. In some cases, it's much easier to buy in New York City than it is to rent. But if you're moving to New York City, you need to understand what the qualifications are. For renting, you must make a minimum of 40 times the rent. That means if you are paying somewhere along the median rent, which would be around $4,000, you need to make $160,000 to qualify. If you do not make 40 times the monthly rent, then you must have a guarantor of some sort. If it is a person that is a guarantor and there are rules around who you can use as a guarantor, that person must make 80 times the rent in order for you both to qualify. There are some other services like online guarantors that can certainly help you through that process. People rent every day in the city, but it is competitive and the qualifications are very high, so it can be difficult. Now, I said earlier that sometimes it's more economical to buy, and it is. It can actually lower your cost of living in terms of what you're paying every month. And of course, you are building equity, which is extremely important. However, buying in New York City is a completely different process with a completely different set of criteria and qualifications than anywhere else in the nation. And you need to understand these to be able to buy into a New York City co-op or condo. There's also a pretty high price tag to be able to buy into a building in New York City. So at the low end with condos, you're looking at a down payment of about 10%. But with co-ops, which makes up 85% of the inventory, you're looking at anywhere from 20 to 25, 30, or sometimes even 40% down to be able to buy into a building. Plus, there are a lot of other criteria that you must qualify for. So just having a pre-approval in New York City does not mean that you can buy in New York City. Whether you're renting or buying, housing can absolutely be a challenge in New York City. It's going to be your largest expense. So you need to take the time to really understand what you're buying into or what you're renting and get some professional help to help guide you through those processes. And I would say the third top con of living in New York City simply is space. Space is a premium in New York City, and that goes along with your living costs, obviously. A lot of people will move out of the city because they start having families or they outgrow the spaces and they just want more space. So maybe they move somewhere in New Jersey, they move somewhere in Connecticut where they can commute into Manhattan, which is very prevalent for people to do. However, you need to understand, if you are moving to New York City, what to expect in terms of spaces. We have studio spaces, studio apartments that start at below 400 square feet. Below 400 square feet. So our spaces are economical. A one bedroom can range anywhere from, say, 750 square feet to 900 square feet if you're lucky on a larger size. But if you're looking for really large spaces, 1,000 square feet or above, if you're looking for very large spaces with 2 bedrooms and more luxury spaces, you are going to be paying a premium. So your rents and or buying that kind of space is going to be much higher than the national average and much higher than the numbers that I'm quoting here. So you must be prepared for what you are going to get for the value of money. Now, with that said, some of those spaces, like for example, that 420 square foot studio may actually be in a luxury building that has a lot of amenities. It may have a doorman, it may have many common spaces, it may have a beautiful rooftop. So your luxury living, your lifestyle goes into what you're paying for in New York City. We are also a vertical market, which means that the higher up you go, the more expensive your place is going to be. We value things according to how high they are in the building. So lots of things to consider when you're buying or renting in New York City when it comes to the actual space of your apartment. But you need to be prepared, in most cases, to live fairly economically when it comes to space. All right, so those are some of the cons about living in New York City. If you are thinking about moving here, you definitely need to be prepared, and I would recommend assembling a team of people, of professionals, to be able to help you through some of those obstacles in moving here. But with that said, again, I've lived here for over 30 years and I still very much love this city and the opportunities that it affords and the lifestyle it affords, and millions of people here in New York City would agree with that. I hope that this video was helpful in some of the cons. There are definitely a lot of pros in living in New York City, and we will do that video as well. Be sure to take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification button so that you can stay up to date on all things New York City real estate, and I'll see you next time.